What's up guys, this is VinylicPuma, and it's been a while, but I am finally back with a subscriber Q&A. Now, I think the last one we did was in early October 2017, so that was almost like 6 months ago at this point, and we're a little bit overdue on a new Q&A. Now, I like doing these Q&As because it's a really good way to touch base with you guys and figure out some things that you guys might want to see, as well as just answer some of your questions that you may have and may have been wondering and want my input on. And as always, if you guys feel like there are certain ways that I could improve, whether that be by improving my video quality or improving my audio quality, or even just trying new things, and if you want to see new types of content on the channel and you've got some ideas, feel free to leave it in the comments below because your feedback is always appreciated. But alright guys, let's go ahead and get into the Q&A. And our first question is going to be from a longtime subscriber. I see him here on the comments every once in a while, and that is Dark Vampire. And they ask, when we see Borderlands 3, do you think we will find out what happened to Rhys and Fiona at the end of Tales from the Borderlands? What kind of speculation do you think can be made about it now? So what I will say is that I sure hope we find out what happened to Rhys and Fiona. For those of you guys that haven't played the game, I won't try to, well, we probably basically just spoil it for you anyway, but at the very end, Rhys and Fiona's fate is basically kind of uncertain and is kind of left wide open at the very end of Tales from the Borderlands. And, you know, I think that we are going to find out what happened to Rhys and Fiona, but as far as to what has happened to them, maybe they've been affected by, like, Iridian energy, sort of like we saw with Zarpedon from the pre-sequel, or maybe they're, like, in control of the vaults now, and maybe they're, like, the main enemies for Borderlands 3. Having Rhys and Fiona be the villains for Borderlands 3 would be a great way to reintroduce Handsome Jack into the series, because I believe in Episode 5 of Tales from the Borderlands, there's an opportunity while you're playing as Rhys to either preserve or destroy your implant that supposedly contains the remains of the Handsome AI. Ultimately, though, I think all of us would like to see Rhys and Fiona be in Borderlands 3, but as far as right now, it's really difficult to say whether that'll happen or not. Okay, so our next question comes from Kevin Price, and he asks, where do you want them to go in Fallout 5, i.e. ideal location? I guess down south, like near New Orleans, or maybe even parts of Florida or in like the Gulf area would be pretty cool. But really, I think the most important thing that I would like to see is an entirely different change of scenery, because most of the Fallout games right now either take place in deserts or irradiated wastelands. Having a Fallout game take place in like predominantly a forest or predominantly a snow-covered area would be a really interesting change of pace and could provide some interesting gameplay changes. For example, maybe in like the snow-covered area, you have to deal with managing the cold and not trying to get frostbite, while maybe in the forest you have to deal with certain types of wildlife that may be more or less poisonous or more or less dangerous or just something like that. I've also probably said this before, but I'd like to see a truly seasonal weather system where it covers autumn, summer, spring, and winter, and I think that would be really cool. Our next question comes from MegaVE, and they ask, do you think that Borderlands 3 should have already known characters as Vault Hunters? I think it should be a mix between already known characters as well as some new characters. For example, I would have no qualms for having Tiny Tina be a playable character in Borderlands 3. At the same time, I don't necessarily want it to turn into the pre-sequel where we basically sort of already knew Nisha, Wilhelm, Athena, and Claptrap. So I think having a balance here would be pretty good. Now, our next question comes from Jacob Mooney, and his question is basically kind of similar. What playable characters do you think will be in Borderlands 3? I'm curious because if you've played Borderlands the pre-sequel to the end, the Iridian Warrior says, and I quote, "War is coming, and you're going to need all the Vault Hunters you can get." Like I said in the previous question, I think Tiny Tina is going to be a playable character in Borderlands 3. However, after that, it's really hard to say. Now, whether old Vault Hunters like Legacy Vault Hunters like Brick, Lilith, Axton, Salvador, or even Aurelia or Athena are going to be playable in the next game, I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. I think a lot of those characters are going to be used to basically advance the plot. So what I think is going to happen is sort of what we saw in Borderlands 2, where you first met Lilith, then you met Roland, then you met Mordecai, and then you met Brick. I could be wrong on that, but that's just going to be my guess. I don't think you're going to be able to play the Legacy Vault Hunters in the new game. We've got another Vault Hunter question here, and that's going to be from Anson D. Grimes, and they ask, which Borderlands 2 NPC do you think would be best suited to be a Borderlands 3 Vault Hunter, and why? If I had to pick somebody other than Tiny Tina, I would probably say Moxie, simply because her weapons basically have lifesteal, and having skills that give you lifesteal would be a pretty cool ability or effect. I highly doubt they would make Moxie a playable character, but I think out of all of the other NPCs, I feel like Hammerlock is too old, Marcus is also too old, and as far as anybody else, Claptrap we've seen before, Athena we've seen before, Nisha we've seen before, Scooter is dead, and I don't know otherwise. I guess there's Tannis, but even then, I'm not sure why I would justify making her a Vault Hunter. We have another Vault Hunter question, and that comes from Keontae Brown, and he asks, who is your favorite Vault Hunter? I presume if you're talking about the current games, Axton has always been my favorite character. I also kind of like Maya too. From the pre-sequel, I would say it's probably Jack. And then from Borderlands 1, it's definitely Lilith. Okay, so now we've got a Fallout question, and this comes from John Doe. And he asks, what will happen to Fallout World in about 1,000 years? From in-game view, will NCR be successful? My thinking would be that humanity would basically be on track and may have even surpassed their pre-war state. At the same time, it's also kind of hard to say because you figure that Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 take place 200 years after the Great War. And when you consider that it's taken them 200 years to build the types of civilizations that they have in Fallout 4 or Fallout 3, it could take a lot longer to return to a pre-war state. It's hard to say, but I think if the NCR will last 1,000 years, I don't necessarily think that'll happen, but I think there will be a logical continuation of the NCR that really would have been the logical continuation of what pre-war America would have been. Whatever that is, who knows? Our next question comes from Quiet Thang, and they ask, what are your opinions on a Fallout Borderlands crossover? Do you think it will be awesome? I wouldn't necessarily mind both series borrowing from one another, but I don't think there should be like a crossover where you have Borderlands characters in the Fallout universe and vice versa. I think borrowing some features from one another is a really good idea. For example, maybe if Borderlands 3 had power armor, that could be pretty cool, but I wouldn't necessarily want it to be the T-51B power armor. If it was a non-canon Easter egg, though, that could be pretty cool. Our next question is a Borderlands question, and it comes from Unholy Basilisk, and they ask, what ideas for unique or legendary weapons do you have for Borderlands 3? Now, I'm going to explain this poorly, but what I would like to see is a shock weapon that bypasses shields. So in essence, you could basically deal the enhanced damage against shields without depleting the shield to an enemy's health bar, if that makes sense. I guess a great way you could think of it is that it would be a trespasser with a shock element. But again, instead of depleting the shield, you would totally bypass the shield and deal whatever enhanced damage that you would deal to shock to the enemy's health bar. Our next question comes from Simply Legendary, and they ask, do you think anything is left of China or Russia in the Fallout timeline? I would say yes, and the reason for that is because in Fallout 2, the Enclave developed FEV Curling 13, and their intention was to deploy it all over the world. And I would say the only reason they would deploy it all over the world as opposed to just the United States would be because they'd want to take out their enemies in China and maybe enemies in Russia if there are enemies in Russia. Maybe an interesting faction in a future Fallout game could be like the Chinese's version of the Enclave, and that could be in a game that takes place on the West Coast. With that said, I think we're just going to have to wait and see what Bethesda's going to do next. Okay, so our final question is a technical question from Christina Kirschner, and she asks, with more cores and threads in modern CPUs, what are some RPG elements you would like to see implemented in open-world games beyond better graphics or smarter AI? This will actually be kind of a hard question to answer because I'm thinking about like technical features. Like basically I would want most games to come out with a VR version. I think that would be pretty cool. But as far as RPG elements go, maybe if you're thinking about like dialogue and dialogue trees, maybe there would be a way to not only like include dialogue choices, but also include dialogue inflections, if that makes sense, to where maybe you could speak one line one way and an NPC interacts with you that way, or maybe you do it another way and then they interact with you another way. I'm not sure how you would implement that into a game though, but it would be kind of interesting to where you could deliver one line multiple times and it has different meanings. Maybe you could have it be kind of like sarcastic one time, maybe serious another, and then maybe the AI or whatever could pick up on that, and that would be pretty cool. But alright guys, I think that's going to pretty much wrap up this Q&A. Again, thank you all so much for your questions. I'm glad to have answered them, and again, like I said earlier, if you have some things that you'd like to see me improve on the channel, feel free to leave it in the comments below. But otherwise guys, like this video if you liked it, click the bell to join the notification squad, and as always, thank you all so much for supporting me. Take care, and I'll see y'all next time.